This hour sponsored by Dell Technologies, enabling digital transformation for media workflows.
This is NAB Show Live.
You're watching the NAB Show Live, brought to you by Broadcast Beats. I'm Steve Wong. I'm an Emmy-winning technologist that specializes in telecommunications, media, and technology with DXC Technologies. And I am here with two of the leaders in the media and technology industry. First, I want to welcome James Robertson from the office of the CTO, that's correct, right? At Aruba, which is an HPE company.
Correct.
And also, I'm honored to have Raghu Puri, the VP GM of DXC Technologies with the telecommunications, media, and telco sectors.
Thank
you. So welcome, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Steve.
So now you just joined Aruba somewhat recently from Time Warner, and so I mean it's really an interesting thing because you were a consumer of Aruba quite a bit at Time Warner.
Right.
Can you tell us why you were looking at Aruba when you were on the other side of the fence there?
So as a broadcaster, Aruba really brought to the table to me the technology set that we needed to support not only our users, right, but give them the experience that they needed from a technology footprint to drive new business models, to new engagement for our end users, our content creating family, across the family of what is now Warner Media Group.
Interesting. So, I mean, Raghu, tell me about the relationship of DXC and HPE Aruba. What is that partnership like?
So it's a very interesting relationship. We have HPE Aruba as a customer. We we sell our services to them around both IT as well as infrastructure and other services that DXC brings to the market because DXC is all about digital delivered. We are also a customer of HPE in terms of using some of HPE's equipment in the services when we take it to market.
A large customer
and
too.
A very large customer of HPE. And then we jointly take solutions to market as well. So we have a 360-degree relationship between HPE Aruba and DXC. And a very fruitful relationship, I may add.
Yeah. Very much so.
Hey, partnerships are the way to go into business nowadays,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. It's hard for one organization to deliver all the facets, so finding the right partner community to make the story whole, the 360 story, really is important.
Yeah. So James, as a fellow recovering broadcaster, tell me the pain points, as a broadcaster of networks, storage, and compute. So what sort of pain did you feel, and how can you empathize with the folks here?
So are we starting a support group, Broadcasters Anonymous?
I think we'd do that on LinkedIn, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's really interesting. I think you have to go back in time a little bit here. If I go back, say, 10 years, and I was talking to my broadcast technologists at the time, and we were talking about IP networks and IP systems. That was stuff that was in the background. It wasn't in the foreground. It wasn't driving cameras. It wasn't driving stuff to air. And I basically said at the time, look, this stuff is going to become pervasive. This IP networking stuff is going to become pervasive in the broadcast chain. You guys are going to have to start to look at this and adopt this. And I was called a heretic at the time, more than anything, right? Basically burn me at the stake because that can't happen. IP networks are the domain of enterprise infrastructure, not the domain of a broadcaster. That's a different monster, and they're special. But move forward. A handful of years and walk around this floor. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody who doesn't have something that's using IP networks at this point.
So what happened? Because I remember being an IT manager at one of the big broadcasters, right? And I was the guy that connected all our salespeople to the internet and our AS400 in those days. And one thing they said is, stay out of the engineering room. Broadcast engineering is different than IT. How we record video is different than a bank. So what happened in the last few years?
Well, I think there's a number of facets there, right? I think the systems behind the scene have become IP, right? Video editing has become IP. Post-production has become IP. Obviously now cameras, but even field operations, getting content in, it's a lot easier to do that in some cases over an IP network, the internet, right? Rather than booking satellite time or finding lease lines or fiber in order to get that service back to home base. So I think it's just a natural progression of IP weaving its way into an ecosystem that where it made sense for it to weave its way in because it's pervasive. It's going to cover all the bases that a broadcaster needs to have, and more than anything, a broadcaster needs a pervasive underlying technology in order to get their job done.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So Raghu, you bring a worldwide view of TMT and the transformation that's going on. So what are the worldwide trends that you see that we need to be prepared for this year?
So I think building on what James said, you effectively are seeing all our clients, whether it's in the media industry or it's in the telecom or the technology industry, are trying to figure out how to transform themselves to serve the next generation of customer experience. So how you engage with the customer, that's the whole digital transformation in platforms and services you want to deliver. How do you provide the back office functions and the transformation in the delivery services in support of those front-facing client engagements? So there's inherent disruption which is coming from either driven by the market, which is forcing our clients to change, or it is coming from the competition, which are digital born and coming into the marketplace and forcing that same type of a change within the marketplace. So as we said, a lot of clients are saying, how do I change my compute, storage, and network infrastructure solutions? How do I change the application layer, which is a lot more dynamic in terms of supporting those services? How do I change the operations in which I'm providing those services, both to my internal client stakeholders, which are my customers, internal employees, as well as my external clients who are now consuming all services through a mobile platform and a mobile ready, which then brings out a whole bunch of inherent risks. Security becomes a challenge. Mobility is a challenge. Dealing with different access networks and the capability around that is a challenge, which is where I think Aruba plays a pretty significant contribution and partnership with us. So you're seeing changes at every level, systems of record versus new systems that they have to build in supporting those services.
Now I remember, there was a time where broadcasters changed with technology because it was the best. But this sort of change is really reactive. The world is changing, Netflix is taking over. And I think the statistic this year, this is the first year in the United States that the non-attached consumer will be more than the actual broadcast consumer, which is a really frightening world for old broadcasters. Right. So the model is changing.
And 80+% of the network has been consumed by video, and a large part of it is being driven by Netflix as part of the service offering.
But we like big pipes, we like big data, we love big compute, so that selfishly, so that sort of works. But in a broadcast station, can you give us an example of how a broadcaster would use a Wi-Fi network? What would if you were to draw one out on a board, how would they use Aruba in a station?
I think you look at the portfolio that Aruba has. It's not just Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is where they grew up, right? As a provider with industry-leading next-generation Wi-Fi technology that's still state of the art. The kind of broadcast space is still relying on obviously a lot of cables, and so switching, high-performance switching, hitless capabilities in Ethernet switching is very important. But from a Wi-Fi standpoint, you think about just connected devices in a studio. I mean, obviously, with the speeds that we can do now with some of these advanced technologies, 802.11ax, for example, that's just hitting the market now from a Wi-Fi standpoint. We're able to provide very robust, gigabit-like speeds over Wi-Fi reliably, and at a reasonable distance as well. So those are technologies that obviously can be coupled with, broadcast technologies to provide a lot of mobility within a studio setting.
So what are the 5 things we need to know about the next generation network that everyone needs to know this year?
Oh, wow. I think the first thing is that networks are evolving. We've gone from speeds and feeds being the important factor of networks to programmatic abilities, artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? Really kind of starting to take over. And these sound like buzzwords, but in reality, what we're doing here is really providing a capability for the engineer running the network, right, to administer the network in very different ways in order to get a experience on the network, right, that's consistent, reliable. I think the other side of it is, we've seen a move to truly what I would call hitless upgrades in the network. Broadcasters have to be up 24/7, 365. Networking equipment is finally at that point where you can do rolling upgrades and not see a hit. Now that, a broadcaster will kind of, go, oh yeah, show me that, right? But truly, you can take a core network switch down, right? Have it completely hitless, have your packet still moving through that network, have it upgraded to a new version of code, bring it back up in a very controlled way, and likewise do kind of the B part of the network. So, the idea of having continuously on networks that are incredibly reliable really have kind of come today in 2019.
Interesting. And Raghu, I know you came from that world, so what's your thought when you were in that industry as a competitive company? I mean, you felt the pains of that.
So I think to the point that was made earlier, if you look at networks, it's all about flexibility and capacity. Flexibility in the terms of the type of devices that are going to try and connect, where they're going to connect, providing the security, as well as providing the flexibility through virtualization of the infrastructure, as well as the services. Because that allows you the dynamic allocation of capacity, as well as the dynamic allocation of speed as necessary. So for example, if you wanted to provide capacity for your higher end subscribers or the higher end high bandwidth services, how do you make that as a prioritize that versus the other service? How do you assure quality of the service? So one of the things in the aspect of networking is being able to provide service assurance, which is an essential component. And when we talk about video and broadcast and distribution, whether it is from point to point for consumption and rebroadcasting, or it is what's happening at the direct to consumer, service assurance is a very essential component, all the way from where the content is dispatched to where the content is being consumed. So as we were talking about Wi-Fi, for example, Wi-Fi connectivity within the house is a pretty key factor, because too many times you send a truck from a service provider to go fix a problem, whereas in reality it is confusion between the Wi-Fi channel, or it is where that device is located relative to the best capacity available. So providing that overarching assurance of the service, ensuring the security of the devices that come into the network, assuring performance of the application, performance of the device, performance of the network, and also the quality of the content that is being fed, overlaying that with, if you want to insert ads and so on, how those ads are being delivered. All these aspects from the application layer down to the infrastructure layer are now having something that you have to look at totality.
Yeah, I think the other part of that is, the security aspect that was just being brought up. Security is, probably one of the paramount things that everyone is worried about, especially in a broadcast environment, right? Keeping that content secure, keeping that network isolated. A lot of the work that Aruba's been doing over the last few years is around, again, the experience, but also adding a layer of security and validation to the products, right? So an ability for a operator, an engineer, to basically say, I trust that device, I'll put that device on this network. But then not only admit that device to the network that first time, but then keep a watchful eye on it. And if the profile of that device changes, someone messes with it, or something goes wrong with it, right? Then the network can automatically report back and go, hey, the profile, the data stream, the traffic pattern of this device suddenly has changed from the norm. And so you may want to take a look at it. And these are things that I think are very important to not only kind of traditional IT shops, but from a broadcast standpoint, again, being able to validate the underlying physical plant of the network and being to verify exactly what's on that network at all times is incredibly important from a content protection standpoint.
That sort of reminds me of that DDoS attack that happened a few years ago.
Yep.
That was all these IoT devices.
Right.
Who would have thought your security camera is going to attack someone with all of this? But
Yeah.
if they had,
Right, which is
like your
exactly
solutions.
why we're looking at that kind of technology and deploying it, because the profile of a device will change if some bad actor has a look at it and starts to mess with it. And so being able to detect that in real time, because that device might have been privileged on the network, but to be able to detect that in real time and then react to it and isolate that device could be a lifesaver.
Interesting.
And I would also add, as you're seeing these smart devices perpetuating in every part of the business, if you remember, enterprises had this problem of BYOD. What do you do with the device as it's there in the enterprise? How do you provide security? Because the access point is the easiest intrusion, and then it affects the overall enterprise network. Similarly, in the broadcast environment, as you're starting to see smart cameras, smart distribution, smart devices come in, it's an essential element to provide that overlay of security, because any of those devices that walk into your studio are likely to potentially compromise any aspects of your whole distribution network.
Yep.
So,
Plus, that's why you need a managed security system like DXC offers. So that's
Absolutely.
a perfect combination. That's not a commercial.
I mean, just without pitching the DXC technology story, I would say the first aspect of any such conversation is a threat assessment, looking at all aspects, and that's universal. And I think to a large extent, threat assessments are only done post an event.
Right.
The proactive assessment, identifying the various devices, working with our partners who are providing the infrastructure devices, whether it's the access devices and so on, providing solutions that look at all aspects from outside in and inside out is a great value proposition that we can help for the industry.
That makes sense. I mean, Aruba has so many things going on. I mean, do you have a training and certification programs, I'd imagine?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a lot of people that go through our training certification in all levels of our technology footprint during the year, and it's becoming incredibly valuable in the industry to say that I'm an Aruba certified engineer.
Yeah. Oh, it's great on the resume, right? So I mean, we were talking about IoT devices. Folks have Alexa and things like that. So how do you see that changing the broadcast network? I mean, folks are bringing their own devices. I mean, when we compare like 10 years ago versus now, when you can have almost everything in your studio, some kind of IoT connectivity.
Yeah.
How does that change as a broadcaster?
So I think what we're seeing is an explosion of IoT, right? And we're seeing devices that have an IP address in them, basically proliferating life. I do a scan of my own home network, and I have about 80 devices on that network now, everything from security cameras to Alexas to doorbells to you name it, right? Let alone the laptops of all the family members and so on. And that's prevalent inside of the enterprise as well, regardless of whether it's a broadcaster or a traditional IT shop. These devices are coming on the infrastructure, and you need to be able to understand what those devices are doing to the point of just plugging them in or having them connect to the wireless network. It's no longer good enough. You need to be able to understand the profile of those devices and maybe segment them into a portion of the network where those devices are common, kind of put them in their own little field, right? We call it micro-segmentation. But basically providing, areas of like devices. So you may have a bunch of Alexas, for example. Well, you don't want your Alexas on a broadcast network potentially being able to reach out and touch a camera.
Yeah.
Right? It may just be there as part of the set or whatever as a fun toy. So being able to say, that's an Alexa, I'm gonna put that in its own, separate isolated network. The only thing it needs to talk to is the internet, versus my broadcast equipment that may not need to talk to the internet at all. It needs to talk to the control room.
Right.
And so creating basically these virtual network segments of security boundaries that allow devices that are common to be able to communicate within their kind of boundary field, is incredibly important. And that's one of the technologies that Aruba's bringing to market.
So if you were to design a smart room, what would that look like with all the tools and toys that you have access to? What's your dream smart room look like?
This could be fun.
Unlimited budget, unlimited technology.
So,
Yeah.
I think I've seen everything, appearing now in the enterprise infrastructure, right? So just think about it, a common conference room, right? From the experience at the front door frame of that conference room, being able to, look who's in that room from an iPad or some tablet device that's slapped on the door frame, being able to book that room, but then also being able to walk in that room and that room automatically recognize that it's James Robertson who's walked in that room because it's communicating with my iPhone, right, that's in my pocket. And from a proximity standpoint, it says, James is in the room. And then it's able to look at the calendaring going on in Microsoft 365 and go, James is on this video call, setting up the video conferencing unit, dialing into the bridge, basically taking care of all of those things that we struggle with walking into a room, right, to hold a meeting. Those are things that are real and can be done and can be orchestrated with reasonable ease now, across an IP network.
Raghu, I think we need this. I think we need this.
And I was just going to tell him that DXC technology can deliver that to you. but I would also say it's not just the smart room. It's a smart home. It's a smart city, or a smart building. All of these are elements when you think of proximity.
Yep.
The devices that you're walking in with, establishing your own personal identity. Authentication, because guess what, this is one of the easiest devices that compromises your network. Yeah. So think of all the apps that we download here, all the permissions we grant every time we download an app, and that is easily compromised through Mariaki type attacks that we have seen happen. But taking that further, and with all the IP address, the sensors that you can have in the building, the room, the house, whatever may be the situation, making them all work together. I mean, as you think of it, at the end of the day, that smart room is a mini operating system for that room, just as you outlined, whether it's who's consuming the service, how that service is being consumed, and then how to configure that room for your own environment, including the temperature, the sensors, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And as soon as he leaves, reset the room to the lowest common denominator so that it becomes energy efficient and reduces our global carbon footprint as well. So those are the type of things I think we are going to see as the application of technology going forward, because there's a limitation of resources over the long term.
So, I mean, I know we're going to close here in a little bit, but I just want to get to, this brings me to venues. Imagine walking into a football stadium and having that same technology. And I know you guys are working on projects like that also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're working on a lot of we have deployed a lot of stadium venues for different sports teams. And, that experience is key, right? A consumer walking into a stadium wants to be connected, and they want to be efficiently connected, they want to be connected at speed. And so being able to blanket the stadium with the coverage model that gets you that level of functionality is critically important, not only for the fan experience, but also from an analytics standpoint. Because then you can start to couple it with BLE, so Bluetooth Low Energy, picking up on the phones, and looking from a location standpoint, being able to guide somebody to the restroom, being able to deliver food to someone sitting in a seat because you know where their phone is. So they can order through an app, which DXC can work on to supply. And that ordering goes to the kitchen. Someone is dispatched with the food straight to the seat. The fan never leaves the seat. They're not sitting in a queue, waiting to get their hot dog. The hot dog is coming to them. And that increases the fan experience, increases the stickiness of that fan, and obviously drives potentially more revenue because the fan can go, I want that sweatshirt now, so I'm going to order that sweatshirt, and someone shows up with the bag with the sweatshirt in it, rather than having to go peruse the shop. So totally changes the dynamic.
That's impressive.
Also the social media aspect of it, which is you're in the middle of it, you've just seen a great touchdown picture, uploaded to Facebook, Instagram, whatever may be the case, as well as streaming the rerun, because guess what? The most frustrating part for a fan, you're sitting in a stadium, something happened, happen to be looking at the wrong side.
There it goes.
You can download the image and see, okay, what really happened? Who got hit with what? And was this really a fair call by the refs or not? So that whole immersive experience, including the e-commerce element that you can layer on top of it, makes for extreme convenience. I mean, look, when you and I choose to go watch an event, if there's a stadium which has all these elements built into it, we'd be more have a propensity to spend an extra
I want to
dollar
go there.
and go there as well.
Right.
So.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time. Again, thank you, Raghu, and thank you, James, for coming out. This was an awesome experience.
Thank
so
you.
again, thanks, folks, again for watching. Thanks for watching NAB Live Show, brought to you by Broadcast Beat. Thanks very much, and we're out.
Thanks.
There you go. Thank you, gentlemen.
This hour sponsored by Dell Technologies, enabling digital transformation for media workflows.